Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform, and this is another in the series that focuses on all the opportunities and challenges in the Trump 2.0 economy. Real pleasure to have my friend and colleague. We've done a lot of things in the last 30, 40 years. He's an enterprise software veteran, did stints at IBM, Hyperion, PeopleSoft, and now for the last, 20 years, he's been CEO at 7 startups and is very active in the private equity world. And guy is just a solid business guy. And hopefully we can talk about the business angles of what's happening in the Trump 2.0 economy rather than just bitch and moan about everything Trump. So Bill, first of all, I didn't give you a very detailed intro. You need 10 minutes to introduce yourself, but please add to the intro and then follow it up with give me some initial thoughts on, nothing with Trump is nice and steady, right? It'll always be loud and chaotic and so on. Give me your first impressions of what's going on in the 2 months. Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, Vinnie, thank you for having me on, and I'm not going to add to my intro because it just makes me feel older. So I'll take it for what you get. And I was like, yeah, look, I mean, the first couple months of this administration is everything that Trump promised it would be, and I think it's quite rare in politics where you have a candidate say, "I'm going to do this, this, and this," and actually do it. And in fact, in many administrations, both Democrat and Republican over the last 15, 20 years, it's just been the status quo. But I think things have changed so dramatically that this is a candidate who felt change was required and an electorate that backed him up on that. And so I think he feels obligated to be able to carry through on the promises that he made.
Well, let's drill into a few. You and I had lunch a few weeks ago. That was great to see you then. But you brought up several issues. We shouldn't have talked much about Washington, D.C. while we were enjoying the seafood in Tampa, but we did. And let's drill into some of those. One of the things I was really intrigued with was you were talking about this push and pull between a globalist agenda and a nationalistic agenda, right? So we didn't completely spend time on that. Spend some time on what you meant by that.
Yeah, I think a lot about this because like this is advanced problem solving, and I think to really understand it, you need to go back 100 years and think about how were things done 100 years ago. Why was virtually everything we did domestic 100 years ago, and there was good reason for that. The primary reason was logistics. We didn't have the ability to move raw materials, people, or finished product easily around the globe. And so you made what you could based on what you had. Whether you had coal, you would mine coal, whether you were smelting and creating metals. But we were a manufacturing economy that over time, moved toward a global economy. And there were a few reasons for that. One is sometimes we needed access to raw materials that we didn't have. Sometimes we needed access to markets where labor was cheaper. And in some cases, we did it to boost the economies of developing nations, to give them businesses that we could then buy from. And that kind of created this globalism, but it all started getting tied up in sound bites around offshore production is cheaper, labor in other countries is cheaper. But the reality is you increase your logistics costs, you decrease your responsiveness to customers. And so, I think it's always good to incent companies to build businesses here, but we have to be able to provide an environment where they can affect, where the barriers to entry are not so high that they say, gee, it's just too expensive for me to start a business. So I think there's a balance. I think it's sort of swinging back toward more nationalism, but I think it's important to understand that nationalism doesn't mean isolationism. It means that we make the best out of what we have. We do the best things that we can do, and we rely on our trading partners to fill in the gaps.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. To me, I think we're finally waking up to the fact that we are the biggest consumer economy in the world. Okay. People always talk about we have billionaires, you're billionaires, we have 800 billionaires. China actually has more billionaires than we do. Okay. Our strength is we have 25 million millionaires. Okay. And we have a middle class, 90 million members are Costco members. Okay. We have a very strong upper strata. that in itself makes us a very, very attractive market to sell into. So why not make it close to demand? I mean, that's a fundamental business principle. Make produce close to demand. And we've gotten away from that, right? And to your point about
Yeah,
supply
completely.
chains, after COVID and all the Suez Canal issues and other issues, why would you not shrink your supply chain, right? So that's one reason I find it baffling that when I talk to Germans or Chinese, they'll say, well, we have better labor or whatever. Wait a minute. You're shipping across oceans. Think of the risk of that, right? Think of the time issues with that. The other thing that bothers me is they look down on our talent. You guys are lazy. You guys are this, whatever, whatever, whatever. And unfortunately, many of our citizens agree with that. I'm like, guys, hold on a minute. Hold on a minute. Look at what we've done in the last 20, 30 years. Look at Amazon distribution centers, right? Most efficient in the world. And how are they? They're not using a labor, they're using hundreds of robots, they're using miles of conveyor belts, they're using um, millions of sensors and all that. Next generation manufacturing or distribution or farming in this country is going to be much more automated. So even if you don't like our talent, it's going to be much more of that, right? And
Yeah.
then I also tell them, I go, in our lifetimes, we've seen Jeff Bezos create Amazon with an amazing e-commerce engine, amazing logistics engine. We've seen Elon Musk do a lot of technological miracles, right? We've seen Tim Cook. He actually created Apple's supply chain in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
These guys are still alive. Mark Zuckerberg built some of the most efficient data centers in the world. Okay. So why not take advantage of these guys? They're still alive. They can help. If you want to build here, we'll bring them in and help you make sure all your concerns go away, right? So I I think we've forgotten that the US isn't exactly a dormant economy. We've done a lot of good stuff in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But if you look at the companies that you mentioned, like a lot of them have moved operations outside of the US for the very reason that I mentioned. Regulation has become too overwhelming and things take too long to get done. And that's a core issue when you have government getting involved in commerce. If commerce isn't, it can't flow freely, then the markets can't adjust. And, I look back at my own experience in the late 80s, early 90s when IBM was selling mainframes with a 93% profit margin. Well, the competition figured out that there was money to be made here and they filled in the gaps. And all of a sudden, that margin went down from 93% to 60% on a $22 billion business. And that's the way a good free market should work is where there's an opportunity to make money, it should be filled in by disintermediating factors. But if you have government too involved in commerce, and I think one of Trump's key tenets is we need less regulation. Now, the other side would say, well, people are going to get hurt, consumers are going to get hurt. And there's some truth in that. There has to be a balance. And I think that's the key is really finding the middle again in order to think about how we justify our own production ethos, our own thesis. And, go back to my parents who were always very focused on, don't use, reuse aluminum foil because they lived through scarcity in World War II. We've never had to do that. We've become dependent on all these foreign assets to satisfy our insatiable appetite. And, we have to make more of it ourselves, but also do a better job at educating our own people on how they contribute to the national progress.
To some extent, Trump, he loves to say tariffs is a beautiful word, right? So people are beating up on tariffs as the cause of all these trade issues. No, it's not. It's because Germany's gotten addicted to running surpluses for the last 80 years since World War II, to your point. We decided it was to help their economy recover. Japan, Germany, we would help them modernize and so on. That doesn't mean you stay addicted to that model for 80 years, right? And on the back of that, China, India, everybody else has jumped into the exports are good, but we won't buy anything from you, right? So that,
Yeah.
that's the fundamental problem we need to solve. And I mean, it's going to me, the awakening needs to happen a little bit in the U.S., but much more in our allies. They've gotten addicted to doing the business a certain way, and it needs to change. What else? What else on trade? What are you hearing from, your colleagues, your investor friends, and so on?
Yeah, I think investors and business owners alike, I'm on the board of two companies in Canada right now. There's a fairly significant anti-American sentiment among the politicians and the media, but you don't find that with the people. And business owners tend to take a longer term view because they have to. They're not swayed by the media. The media is there to sway the population because they vote and they want them to vote a certain way. And so I think business owners are much more pragmatic. I think everybody's concerned about some type of slowdown. I think in the US, one of the things that's not being exposed very well is if you stop this hundreds and hundreds of billions of spending dollars that have been flowing into our economy from the government, it's going to have some impact. It's going to be, cause some contraction. But I think we need to talk about the debt. We've set a new baseline for spending based on what happened in COVID that's just completely unsustainable. Over a third of our tax dollars go to interest payments today. Imagine if we could reinvest that money into the infrastructure of our economy, we'd be unbeatable. And so I think the mindset just has to completely change.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And to your point, let's go into the how are we trying to trim our budget, right? Because you're right, national debt is 36 trillion, unsustainable. And so enter Elon Musk and DOGE. Are we on the right path there? Should we be doing it slower, quicker? Just people are so hostile to it, and you have to keep reminding them, hey guys, 36 trillion in debt, $1 trillion a year in interest, not sustainable. But what are you hearing?
Yeah, it takes me back, Vinny, like the days in the late 80s when cable TV started to become more prominent. And then we started having local cable, and they would broadcast public meetings. And the public meeting became, in a small town, became a nothing ball to being a stage for people to air their grievances or politic for something that they wanted. And that's only continued. Social media has made this, 10 times worse. So it's like, how do you get information to people in a way that's going to be, they can make their own decisions about what's really happening. And the soundbite has now become like this sound micron where it's, I think you saw a couple of weeks ago, the Democrats, 22 Democrats put out a video of them talking about all the bad things happening. It was the exact same script.
Yep.
And it was, I think, a little bit of a surprise to even them that like they kind of got not caught, but they were using the same talking points. But that messaging is really dangerous. And all Musk is saying is, say, look, we are just spending way too much money. And most companies, as they grow, go through the same kind of, sort of cathartic thing. So like, hey, based on where we are in our stage of growth, are we organized the right way? Do we have the right mix of skills and talent? And you have to analyze that on a frequent basis. If you don't, you become Xerox, you become Kodak, you become a company that stops looking at the market and the forces that are affecting you. And this is our reality. We are $36 trillion in debt. We are spending at a rate that's unsustainable. We're spending money on things that we're basically using our economy as a trading chip in a lot of these other economies to not only support us, but to support them, but also to get, political favors done in exchange for funding. So it's got to be back to basics. It's, this has happened before. Clinton Gore cut 377,000 jobs. Obama created the US Digital Service, which is what DOGE is based on. Every administration, and it cracks me up because on X, there are always video clips of a senator saying 20 years ago, we have to go after waste, fraud, and abuse, followed by their clip of saying, we can't have DOGE focused on waste, fraud, and abuse. Digital memories live forever. But I think we have to, in business, you look at it and you say, okay, we're going to take a zero-based budgeting approach, which is going to say, I start with spending zero. Now we have to justify what we spend on sales, marketing, production, whatever it is, finance, G&A, overhead, all those things matter. And we need to do the same thing in the government. What are the core essential things that we need to satisfy the taxpayers who are providing this funding to the government? What are the social programs that we need to keep a contract between the government and the taxpayer? And what do we have left over to make sure that we are able to spread our message of freedom and democracy? Because that's been a key tenet of our republic for so long. So I think that's a big piece of it is really now, is Elon, the most, is he doing this the sort of softest, nicest way possible? No, absolutely not. That's not who he is. And you saw what he did at Twitter, and everyone said that Twitter was going to just fall apart and die. And guess what? It didn't fall apart and die. And now everyone's saying, well, it just must have been wholly inefficient, which it was, which is, what he understood. So that zero-based approach is important. And then thinking about how do I apply my resources? Where do we need to apply incentives? So things like research into health, research into pharmaceuticals. Like there needs to be some profit incentive for those folks. That's where they should make their money. But the distribution of medications to every citizen should be the most efficient possible. And I don't really care if that's a public service or a private service, but what I do know is, we can create these public benefit corporations that are intended to serve the public that are restricted from making, outrageous sums of money that we see flowing to the pharmaceutical industry today and still achieve the objective. So I think it's not necessarily a clean sheet of paper, but it's a pencil with a pretty big eraser on it to sort of reset the building blocks of our economy and how we provide the social services that we've committed to, but also maintain our standing in the world.
And I think a lot of it is personalized to Elon, right? And a lot of it comes from the left because they're very disappointed with what he did to Twitter, and they just think he's gone crazy on the right and so on. But I like to point out not just the efficiencies he's brought to Twitter, but if you look at SpaceX, I was at their Boca Chica facility in Texas a couple of years ago, and I saw a figure that was just mind blowing. It says, the cost to get to orbit, NASA was, I think, 2 billion per launch, and SpaceX has brought it down to 60 million. Okay, it was like a 30-to-1 factor reduction of getting anything to orbit, right? And you go,
Right.
wow, this guy, how could you not trust somebody like that to cut basic spending, right? So I think there's a lot of ideological stuff behind the hate for Elon, or everything he does, people just automatically assume is to help him, or to help billionaires or whatever. So
Well, and it's not necessarily what he's done, but what people are being told that he's doing,
true.
which in many cases just isn't right. But look, the reality is government's different. It serves a social purpose, but many of the principles of business can be applied. It requires, how do we model? So a good example would be like an ambulance service. Like today, most areas have said, we're outsourcing this. So there are a bunch of private companies, and then they charge people who are transported by ambulance basically a transaction fee, instead of these communities building these systems, buying the capital, maintaining the capital, employing the people. I'm not sure if they did a real analysis, we find out which is better. But the transactional approach has become sort of the major way of doing things, because it's like, oh, we pay by the drink, and that's a better model. And it's not always a better model. So I think you have to think about those effective long-term capital models instead of these short-term models, and really think about, is this something where we want to drive incentive for innovation or efficiency for cost reduction? And I think if we, take that blank sheet of paper and do it that way, then we'll end up in a better place.
Could it have been done a little bit differently? People say they haven't approached it right. They've done it too quick, or they've done it too, the targeting hasn't been right. Would you have done it any differently?
I have to admit I wouldn't, only because I think Trump tried in his first term to do that. He trusted people in government to help him. They
Yes.
were part of the problem. And I think it's so out of control. I mean, for our 535 members of Congress, we have over 12,000 staffers supporting those Congress people, and that number keeps growing. Everybody knows in business, the more overhead you add, the less efficient you become. And so we did it by funding big departments, creating new departments. Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education, but then we've also spawned all these non-governmental, these NGOs that might as well be government agencies because 100% of their funding comes from the government. So, like, we've got to pull all that back in and ask ourselves the question: does this make sense? Does it promote our commitment to the American people of this social contract that we have? So Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all the services that are provided. And then how do we make sure that we not necessarily justify, but have a good reason for the rest of the things that are being done that's completely outside of politics? And I think, you know, term limits, age limits in Congress are a big issue as well. It's very easy to get entrenched at a big company, just as it is in big government, and then you just end up doing things the same old way. And you need some new voices to shake that up every once in a while.
Some of the disinformation around Social Security, Medicare, and so on, that Elon's going to cut that out. I mean, I'm amazed people don't seem to understand that those are separate funds that we've all paid towards, right? It can't just be taken away. But it just seems like the disinformation works, and people are worried about that. But what, what do you think about that? How do we stem that disinformation?
I think it's a personal responsibility to educate yourself, and not everybody. Look, the reality is not everybody can do that.
Yes.
And to be perfectly fair, a large portion of our population lives pretty close to the earth. And so when they hear that their potentially only source of income, if you're a senior citizen or a disabled person, is going to be cut, you become naturally concerned. But you may not have the ability to affect that in any way. And so you'll look to your elected politicians to support you and do that. And if they're, there for 100 bad things, but they don't want to cut your entitlement program, you're still going to support them for that reason. So it's difficult. It is, social media has made the flow of information so rapid fire, so real time. And it doesn't mean it's always right. But in many cases, if you can do your own research on what the actual impact is, Canada and tariffs is a great example. I think most people don't know the number of products that are tariffed by Canada today. And there's always, the right saying, oh, it's bigger than what Trump is doing. And I don't even know. I haven't even had the chance to go look at all the things that they do. But I hear the sound bites, 250% on dairy, 100% on booze, those kind of things. I don't know what the absolute impact is for that. But what I do know is, as I've paid more attention to what's going on in this government, I find myself doing more of my own basic research to find out what the truth is.
Amen. Amen. I mean, there's so much exaggeration, if not disinformation, on both sides, that first person conversations, you and I talking is probably a better source of information than we.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Another thing that we talked about, which you seem passionate about, was immigration policies and some of the, well, I guess one of his early successes is illegal immigration has crawled, literally. It's a crawl now in just 2 months, right? But explain to me where you were going with your philosophy on immigration. And
yeah, my grandparents were all immigrants. I know you're an immigrant. My son's getting married next year. His fiance's grandmother, who lives here, is an immigrant. And the great news is you can talk to immigrants about why they came here and what was so attractive about emigrating to America. And, in many cases, people are trying to escape war or strife or some type of bad thing happening. Some just want a better life. They want a better life for themselves, and some want a better future for their families. And those are all really good reasons. What immigration does is help fill in the gaps of this national construct that we have. Because if we tried to satisfy our appetite with the labor that we needed, every family would have 6 kids, because we just hadn't been able to keep up with the number of people that are necessary. And it's a real fallacy to say, well, immigrants only do the low skilled work, because we know we have brilliant scientists, doctors, computer scientists, people in every walk of life that are immigrants that contribute to our economy. So again, to me, it's like this has to be purposeful. First of all, if you're a bad actor, you should not be let into this country. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how much money you have, but you should not be allowed to immigrate. And we have to think about what do we need? And, companies are making their own adjustments. You walk into a McDonald's today, you don't see three people at the counter. You see a big display screen, and you walk over and you pick your things, and then magically somebody appears and gives you your food because they just figured out that they can't afford to hire those people. Like even high school kids don't want those jobs anymore. So, I think a lot of it is like we can't plan 25 years in advance and then go tell the public, look, you need to triple baby output this year because 25 years from now, we're going to need more. So, like, do we understand at sort of every level what's required? But what we can't do is use immigration as a political tool to flood, our market and then support that economically without good reason. And look, I'm not going to speak for either side of the aisle, but I'm sure the left felt that there were good reasons for doing what they did. I'm sure the right has far arguments. And again, it's the extremists that are the biggest issue. The moderates and the people in the breadbasket of this country understand, and by the way, all get along very well, understand the need for, people who can work, people who want to work, people who can bring skills and experience. So, I think we need to have expanded guest worker programs. I think we have to look at how we potentially extend student visas 1 to 2 years beyond educational life so they can get a job and be sponsored by a company. A lot of people have waited a long time to get into the country and then to get their green card and then eventually their citizenship. We have to protect that because it's such a valuable, our citizenship in this country is such a valuable asset to everybody. And when you talk to people that are outside of the country and understand that, you really get a sense of how good it is. But politicizing it just doesn't make it better. It's bad for the immigrants because all of a sudden every immigrant is bad. And I think it just requires us to be far more thoughtful, but make sure we're thinking about, more than just the skills issue or, people picking crops, but, attitude, right? People who want to be here, people who want to be part of our nation and part of that national identity, their enthusiasm for contributing to the economy versus taking from the economy. And finally, gratitude, like being grateful for everything that this country can provide versus saying, no, my beliefs that I bring with me are the most important thing. And so I'm going to try and rebuild those here. You have to be part of this national identity, I think, in order to be a long-term contributor to the economy.
Couldn't agree more. Took me 10 years to become a citizen, right? But there was a process, right? I went through FBI checks. I went through medical examinations. I went through English language tests. I went through civics tests. And the 10 years were part of the assimilation process, right? To your point, how do you become a good citizen? How do you become a good neighbor? How do you not force your original values before you arrive in this country on everybody else, right? So there is a process. The one thing I won't forgive the Biden administration for was they forgot we had a process. I mean, letting in unvetted, no medical checks, no background checks, no, oh, by the way, I also went through something called labor certification, which was, back then, your employer had to advertise and see if anyone wanted your job. And then they had
Right.
to defend why they hired Vinnie versus any other applicants. In my case, nobody applied. But, it was a way of listening to the market that, hey, look, you're not bringing in people. We're flooded with available people. Why are you bringing in somebody we don't need, right? We have the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which has data by occupation, by region, and so on. Let's use that as a guide on, let's not completely ignore farm workers and all that. We need some of that. We need tradespeople, right? We don't just need computer scientists and white collar immigrants, but we have a process. Let's get back to that. Is my
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, look, either we create the population we need to satisfy our appetite, which I don't think we're ever going to do, or we have more thoughtful policies that provide this, the fuel for our economic engine. But I do think, it's got to be, as soon as we politicize it, it's bad for everybody.
Bill, as usual, you are pragmatic and level-headed. And thank you for taking the time. Any final thoughts? Anything you want Trump to do or not do if you were to meet him for 10 minutes?
I think everybody has discovered that there's nothing you can say to make him act any differently than he is. But I hope the American people on both sides of the aisle realize that, this is somebody who didn't need to do this, who, almost got killed in the process of running for office. And I don't think that makes him a god or anything special, but it is a commitment to the country that I think more of us need to have, and a commitment to ourselves and our communities and building better, versus listening to sort of the divisive rhetoric that sells advertising through the media. And I think the more we can think about how we help each other and build our nation the right way, you know, could he be a little more of a velvet glove? Yeah, probably. But I also think he probably thinks at this point that it just needs to be chaotic in order to affect change. And I'm hopeful that too many things don't break in the process.
Bill, I'm glad you said that. To me, I never thought I would say this, but what I've been impressed with is he's actually behaving like the adult in the room, right? I mean, he's telling Ukraine, quit killing people, right? I mean, why
Yeah.
haven't the Europeans stepped up and said that? We've had 3 years of God knows how many people killed on both sides. What is wrong in saying, guys, quit, right? Or telling Wall Street, guys, I have, you know, market can go down a little bit. I'll take the blame, but it's nothing to do with tariffs. The market was overvalued. It was due for a correction, right? It,
Right.
it's it's impressive to see somebody step up and say, you know, I have a different understanding of the situation. Allow me to make my point, and I'll take my lumps, right? So, and
Well, it is interesting because so many of the prognosticators that are out there are basing everything they talk about on historical information. And as we know, history is not a really good not a really good way to think about the future. So, 5 o'clock yesterday, we had doubling of tariffs on Canada. We had electricity surcharges coming from Canada. We had no end of the war in sight, and by midnight we had not doubling the tariffs, no electricity tariffs, and proposed ceasefire in Ukraine. So you're right. I mean, things we have to get things done. An activity report is not progress. Actually getting things done, stopping these wars, making sure the economic balance for the greater good is right, is the most important thing. But it's going to require all of us to get smarter about it, so we know what's right and what's not.
well, thank you so much. Need to bring you back in a few months, and maybe we'll have a different tune. But
Well, it was great to see you, Vinny, and great to see you a few weeks ago. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
thank you.